Wasseem Emam. I'm the founder of Ethical Seafood Research. We are a small nonprofit based officially in Glasgow, but most of us are spread around the world. We have an office in Spain, where I'm based. We also have a presence in Egypt and Kenya, where we have teams on the ground who are very much farm focused. And of course, I am also affiliated with the Complutense University, as Asma mentioned. So our work really operates at the intersection of animal welfare science, aquaculture science, and international development or development policy in the global south. And what I want to do today is try to make the case for why fish welfare or aquatic animal welfare, why it really has to belong in this room. So if we start with scale, I think Laura did a really nice, good job of bringing that home earlier. But if we talk about aquatic animals alone, so just the food system has around a trillion fish that are killed across both wild capture fisheries and aquaculture. If we look at just the farmed animals, by number alone, that's more than all the land animals combined. And we're not even talking about shrimp or other invertebrates here. Again, I use fish welfare as an umbrella term, but it's a huge number either way. A key point to highlight, though, is that almost 3/4 of that production takes place in the global south, where there's almost no welfare regulation of any sort, or not much oversight over the sector in many cases too. So yeah, fish are the largest category of animals that are used by humans, but they're among the least protected. And that is a gap that we are working on addressing. Of course, one of the first questions that used to always come up when we talk about aquatic animals and their right for protection was, do they suffer, and do they feel pain, and so on. Luckily, the conversation has moved on in the last couple of decades. So, of course, the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness explicitly included fish amongst the species that have the neurological substrate to experience pain. And then, of course, we had a whole bunch of studies that showed that fish avoid pain and will make trade-offs in order to avoid painful stimuli, and will also seek analgesics when in pain, and that they learn to avoid painful experiences in the long term, of course, which was, people always thought of fish as being 3-second memories and so on. So that was a game changer. And I just wanted to mention some of the frameworks that are commonly used in animal welfare science and the ones that we use. So the 5 domains model, nutrition, environment, health, behavior, and mental state, although mental state for aquatic animals is a bit less used. I like that one personally just because it maps really well onto production context, and you can apply it to consequences quite easily when you're working with farmers. But there's also the 3 spheres that's commonly used. Again, effective state is harder to use or to think of with aquatic animals to measure, so that's why we don't use that framework too much. But anyway, my key point here was just that the science is settled enough to act, and it's no longer a question of whether fish suffer, but what we do about it. So where do we come in, or where do we fit in within fish welfare issues globally? So we have 4 areas that we work across, and they integrate in a deliberate way. Of course, research is in our name, but we're really talking about applied research. So how can we solve existing issues? We work with farmers in farm conditions. We don't do too much lab work with controlled environments and so on. And of course, we use those findings to build the capacity of the producers and regulators in the countries that we work, always taking findings and making them actionable. And lately, we've also started to engage with policy processes. I'll talk a bit more about that, and try to embed welfare into either existing standards or create new standards, but also any market frameworks like certifications and so on. But I just want to make the point that it's not a lack of scientific knowledge that's holding back progress. It's definitely a lack of actionable guidance. So we try to put tools and knowledge into the hands of people in a very practical way. So this is one of our flagship projects I just wanted to highlight I think it illustrates really well how we approach the problem. Harvesting, well, we call the project Harvest Well Egypt. So for those who don't know, the term harvest in aquaculture refers to the last part where you take the animals out of the production system or the water. There's a lot of terms in aquaculture that are very agricultural, not really treating animals as sentient beings at all. We try to not use those terms, but I think you kind of have to when you're working with industry a bit. So we're trying to, basically the harvesting process is one of the most stressful aspects of a fish's life, but there's so much that we can do to improve it in a way that benefits producers, benefits consumers as well, because shelf life and the stress of the fish is reflected in fillet quality. This project alone has the potential to improve the lives of millions of fish, since Egypt is one of the top producing countries in the world in terms of aquaculture. And of course, remember, there's no welfare regulations at all, no mention of humane slaughter. Even the word humane doesn't translate well into Arabic at all. And another one of our projects that we've been running a lot, and I'm putting this here just because it's a nice example of how to take science and make it actionable or translate it into practice. So we've been running this project for the last couple of years using a tool developed by FAI, who are a UK-based food systems consultancy. Basically, this app, this is a tilapia one that is used for that species, but any teams that visit farms regularly, they can basically use it to score indicators across the 5 domains, and it gives you an actionable recommendation at the end for how to improve production. But what we do is that we provide the training and scientific oversight, but we also use this to collect data on like farm level data in a systematic way, and that's now the data that we're using to push for creating standards and welfare policy in the countries that we're most involved in. Of course, places like the EU and the UK have some of the more developed frameworks for animal welfare. The EU Council regulation does cover fish and aquatic animals in general. And of course, the Animal Welfare Act also applies to fish. I know there's a lot of question marks around enforcement being inconsistent, about the lack of binding standards during production, but still a definite upgrade on some of the places that we work where there's zero legislation at all. There's some on biosecurity, on health and so on, but yeah, we feel that we're operating at the frontier of that in many ways and trying to build the evidence base so that we can push for standards. And that's why I said that probably market incentives are the most tractable near-term lever. So what does science need from law, and what does law need from science? Of course, I'm talking about this from an aquatic animal perspective. There's a mutual dependency framing that we talk about a lot, but of course, the science can tell you what suffering looks like, what welfare indicators are useful, what interventions we can test, but on its own, it can't create incentives for change, of course. And that's why we need law. Science needs from law recognition of sentience. We need harmonized minimum standards. We need mechanisms that can be enforced. Of course, things like certification incentives and procurement are very helpful too, and neither can work without the other. I just put here 3 of our initiatives that are probably most linked to law policy sphere, which we've started to, let's say, dabble in the last couple of years. So the first one there, the Zanzibar Aquaculture Development Strategy. In 2024, the government of Zanzibar, for those who don't know, it's a semi-autonomous part of Tanzania. They're islands off the coast, and they are heavily involved in seaweed farming, but they really want to get into fish farming. So they said to us, "Oh, you guys know a lot about fish. Can you help us, get into fish farming?" And we said, "That's not really what we do, but we'll do it in exchange for putting in more high welfare standards." And they said, "Yeah, sure, that's not a problem." So actually, as we were mapping their sector, we realized that they were much better suited to scaling up seaweed farming and focusing on that more, as opposed to pivoting to finfish farming. And out of that, we spawned a whole other program looking at when does it make more sense to focus on seaweed as opposed to finfish, which is a big thing within the blue economy space. So that's one of our interesting policy achievements of the last year or two. And we're also working with the Kenyan government to develop the first code of practice on farm fish welfare in the country and also in Africa. So that'll be a real precedent there. And we're taking the data that we have from all of the welfare assessments we've been doing on the ground and trying to use that to build a foundation for the standards. And that's a project that we're working on with the Bureau of Standards there, and the Fisheries Service, and the Directorate of Veterinary Services. And actually the last one, just to bring it closer to home, is the Spanish legislation project that we've only just started. And the idea there is that we're trying to explore whether there's any bandwidth for pushing for banning the live sale of aquatic animals in Spanish wet markets. We have a reason to believe that there might be some appetite there. So that would be a consumer-facing project, not something we do a lot of. Retail level, and I guess more relevant to this audience. But it's a nice example of how law can potentially regulate welfare at the point of sale. So not production, which is what we're used to, but the other end. And of course, that would sit within the EU framework. So if we have success here, it could have potential well beyond Spain. And it would set a precedent, of course. So one of the species that we work on a lot, tilapia, for example, is often described as hardy or resilient, and they can tolerate poor water quality. You can crowd them at higher densities, and they don't show stress in the same way that it would kill other species, but they can tolerate it. But we feel that that's very misplaced. So tolerance is not the same as welfare, and often what you see is that this physiological resilience is masking suffering. So, you can see chronic stress, high cortisol levels, a decline in condition factor, and even behavioral suppression, but you'll still see mortality rates. The fish aren't dying, so it doesn't mean that the welfare is good. It just means that the fish are surviving. It's an issue that we often come across in our work, and it has implications for policy design, because if you build welfare standards on production metrics, that's not really a welfare standard at all. So I'll just leave you with the core argument that fish welfare is not a niche, as some would like to have us believe. It's actually the largest unaddressed animal welfare problem in the world, if you look at it in terms of sheer numbers alone. Of course, the science is now there. The tools are already developed or being developed, but what we're missing is legal architecture, standards, enforcement, and rights-based recognition that we're hoping to see in some more jurisdictions. So that's why fora like this exist. Thank you very much.